Hey guys, welcome to True Reflections. I hope everyone is having an awesome day and an awesome beginning of the year. Um, I must be the worst person in the history of podcasters. I know that I have been really inconsistent with my content, which I do apologize for. But unfortunately, I've had a series of events going on in my life, which I don't care to get into right now. But I I hope and pray that it changes and that I can be more consistent in the content that I provide with you guys. So today's topic is about toxic exes. And the reason why this topic is interesting to me is because as I scroll down social media, regardless of the social outlet, there's always someone, be it male or female, dedicating their posts to someone that may have been in a relationship with a toxic person. And then it dawned on me. We're all dishing out advice to people who may have had a toxic ex. But do any of us ever stop to think about or acknowledge the fact that maybe you have been the toxic person in that relationship? No, seriously, think about it. Is there any way possible that you may have been the toxic person in that relationship? Isn't it possible that you were the one that was wreaking havoc in another person's life, stealing their mental peace? Because it's interesting that everybody has a message to these people that may have ended a relationship with a toxic person. But how many of us are actually willing to take accountability in admitting that there's a possibility that I may have been the toxic person? How many of us are willing to admit or take accountability and say that maybe the relationship didn't work out because of me, because of my toxic ways, because of my narcissistic ways? Because honestly and truly, it is so easy to point the blame. It is so easy to see the fault and the error in another person based on what they did or didn't do in a relationship. But how many of us are willing to admit that maybe we fell short also on our end? And I know many of you are going to say, well, I reciprocated energy, I match energies, and I did this and I did that, as a way to justify your own toxic behavior, as a way to not take accountability for your actions that were toxic to the other person that ultimately ended the relationship. See, it's so easy to blame others for things that went wrong. But the hardest part is actually looking at ourselves and admitting to ourselves that we weren't totally innocent in how things played out. So as I listen to these messages that people have to give to a person that may have the courage to escape a toxic relationship and escape a toxic ex, it's amazing to me, because again, I wonder how many of our exes will deem us toxic. Like, if you were to talk to any of your exes, if you were to maybe communicate with them in an open forum freely without fear of biasness or judge, and you were to ask any of your exes, was I ever toxic to you? Did I do anything to you that you deemed toxic? How many of us would be able to handle the truth? How many of us would be able to accept it in order to handle the truth? Because honestly and truly, when we're talking about toxic relationships, sometimes it's always one-sided. Oftentimes it's always one-sided. Oftentimes nobody wants to take accountability. Because if you ask the male in a relationship, he is going to say that she was toxic. He is going to say that she was crazy, she was insecure, she had trust issues, she was going off at the mouth, she was this and she was that. The male is going to say that his crazy ex, whom by the way was not crazy when you met her, he is going to say that she was the toxic one. And then if you talk to the female in the relationship, she's going to say that he was the toxic one. She is going to say that, he was verbally abusive. He's going to say that he was physically abusive. She's going to say that he cheated. She's going to say that he gaslighted, like he did this and he did that. Which, in disclaimer, I'm not downplaying any of those facts. I really am not. But I'm just saying that if you ask both parties, they both are going to hold claim that the other person was toxic to them. So with that being said, is it a possibility that they both were toxic to each other? Because it takes two to tango. It takes two to either make or break a relationship. And if he is claiming that she was toxic, and she is claiming that he was toxic, then the bottom line is that they were both toxic to each other. But ultimately, neither one of them is willing to take accountability for their toxic traits that they displayed to each other whilst being in a relationship. It all boils down to accountability. And it all boils down to listening to the other person's truth, because what you may not deem toxic may be toxic to them. And ultimately, it boils down to whether that person has healed. Maybe something you said or maybe something you did may have triggered a toxic trait in them. But they doesn't deem it as being toxic. They look at it as a defense mechanism because they're triggered. But we have to take accountability for our actions, because there are no two perfect people in a relationship. It's two imperfect persons that are in a relationship that is willing to work through their imperfections with trust, understanding, consistency, and compromising in order to make that relationship work. And ultimately, we have to listen to our partner when they come to us and say, what you're doing is hurting me and I don't appreciate it. Rather than get defensive and deem the other person as crazy or deem the other person as narcissistic. And again, I'm not downplaying those traits because there are some narcissistic people out there. Okay, I'm not downplaying it. I can't downplay it. I have been in a narcissistic relationship. I survived a narcissistic relationship. So there is no way that I can downplay a person being narcissistic. But I'm also not going to downplay the fact that I too may have narcissistic tendencies. I am not going to sit here and say that I have never been toxic to somebody else. That would be a lie before God. So we can't go ahead and label these people crazy or toxic or narcissistic when they come to us and express their concern and express their feelings. If you genuinely care about the person that you are with, you will most definitely take what they have to say into consideration without labeling them as toxic. It becomes toxic when it's consistent, when the disrespect is consistent, when the inconsideration and the mistreatment and the abuse, be it mental, physical, emotional, when those things become consistent, the relationship then becomes toxic. And then you have to then decide what you're going to do with the relationship and yourself. If you decide to stay in a toxic relationship, and many people out there, and this goes for both sides, okay? I know men being in toxic relationship do not get touched on a lot. That is something that is overlooked. That is the biasness and the double standards of our society. We don't believe men to be in toxic relationship. It's always the females that speaks up about being in toxic relationships. And when the guy speaks about being in a toxic relationship, we don't believe it, or we make light of it, or we look at this person as being soft, which is a sad state, a sad reality that we live in. But we cannot dismiss the fact that both men and women can be toxic to each other in relationships. And it's not something that we have to overlook or to downplay. So before you label your partner as crazy or narcissistic or crazy or whatever, you have to reflect within yourself and take into consideration what is being said to you. That's if you genuinely care about that person and do what needs to be done to fix it. And if you stay in these relationships, could it very well be that there is a part of you that loves the toxicity of that relationship? Could it be? I know many of us do not have the courage to leave. It takes strength. It takes a whole lot of strength, especially if you have been in a relationship with someone for so long and you have invested so much, not only into that relationship, but you have invested so much into that person that it scares you to walk away. especially if a situation where you feel like your partner is cheating. You don't want to let the other person win. And I'm saying this in parentheses because who's actually winning here besides the guy? Because if you're in a toxic relationship where your partner is cheating on you, the only person that is winning is the person that's doing the cheating. The other two parties are both losers, in my opinion. So, out of fear of letting the other person win, and especially women, just the idea of starting over with someone new, ugh, it just, I don't know if I can find words to explain that. But we hate having to start over. We just want the person that we are currently with to act right because we've invested so much of ourselves both into that person and into that relationship. But when the situation becomes so toxic and you want to leave, there are situations where the partner doesn't want you to leave. There are situations where the partner makes it impossible for you to leave. And then you have that fear of leaving. That is a totally and completely different scenario or situation, as opposed to you do have the strength and the courage to leave, but you refuse to leave. If you are in a situation where you are refusing to leave a toxic relationship out of fear of the other person winning, could it be that you are attracted to that toxic person? Could it be that you find comfort in playing the victim of being in a toxic relationship? And could it also stem from something that is broken within you, that you view toxicity? I cannot pronounce the word for nothing in the world, but you guys know what I mean. That you view toxicity as a sign of love. Could it be? Because there are people like that. And again, this goes for both sides, male and female alike. Depending on the environment that we grew up in, there are many of us out there that views toxicity as love. We view it as love because that is all that we know. There are people out there, both male and female alike, that thrives on the drama of what a relationship brings. There are people out there that has traumas, unhealed traumas in their life, that they attract the toxicity into their relationship because they feel good in it. They feel good being the victim all the time because that's what they know. That's what they deem to be love. But it's not love, because love isn't supposed to hurt. Love isn't supposed to be toxic. So whilst we're out there giving relationship advice to people that have been in toxic relationships, which is all good, because sometimes we need someone to speak into our life, to speak positive into our life. Sometimes we need a little guidance from others, from the outside, an unbiased opinion or unbiased advice as to how to move forward after getting out of such a toxic situation. But at the same token, we have to acknowledge our part, or the side of us that was toxic to somebody else, because it can't always be the other person that was toxic to you. Lord knows I have been toxic to people. I have. Am I proud of it? No. But I have. I'm not perfect. I have been toxic to people. The same way I'm sure that many of you have been the toxic person in a previous relationship. I have been on both ends of the spectrum. So I can see it from both sides. And I'm sure many of us have been on both sides of the spectrum. But the question is, are you willing to take accountability for your actions in that relationship that you were toxic in? And sometimes it doesn't take anything drastic to be toxic. Just the fact that you enter a relationship with a person knowing that you did not go in that relationship with 100% the truest or the purest of intentions. If you know that you like this person, but you didn't really like them enough to view yourself in a relationship with that person, you can unwillingly become toxic to that person because your feelings was not genuine. The sole purpose of your intentions of getting into that relationship with that person was not sincere. It was not genuine. So we can unintentionally become toxic to that person and not realize that you were being toxic. If you are not reciprocating the exact same effort and the exact same energy that this person is giving to you, and you are making a big deal of their display of affection because you want that affection, you do, but you just don't want that affection from that person, because that is not the person that you crave. That is not the person that you want. That is not the person that you desire that affection from. So when that affection is giving to you and you don't receive that in the manner in which it should have been received, that in itself is toxic. There are so many levels to the word toxic. Sometimes it's not something that is like, obviously. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's very subtle that you're breaking this person apart slowly but surely, very subtly, but you're doing it. Sometimes we're conscious of our toxic actions and sometimes that we're not. Hence why I said, if any of your exes were to come to you and say that you were toxic to me during our relationship, would you be able to accept it? Would you receive it and acknowledge and think about, hey, maybe I was toxic to him. Maybe I was toxic to her. Maybe if I had done things differently when she had, or when he had tried to speak to me on it, maybe there would have been a different outcome in the relationship. But you didn't think about, you being toxic. You were just looking at this person is reacting, but you're not thinking as to why they are reacting. We all have toxic tendencies. We all have narcissistic tendencies. Some is more exaggerated than others, but we all have the tendency to be a certain way, And again, if you are in a relationship where that is not the person that you wanted to be in a relationship in, if you find yourself in a relationship where you settled, when you settle, when you find yourself settling for somebody, they are not going to get 100% of your affections. And that can lead to you being toxic to that person, whether knowingly or unknowingly. So we have to be able to accept those character traits within ourselves if we're going to say that I'm going to do better, because we're not perfect. Nobody is perfect. Even the most perfect couple that we see, the most perfect couple that we may idolize, that we call couple goals from afar, they may be perfect for each other at that moment, but before they found each other, the couples that we admire, the couples that we like, oh my God, I want a relationship like them. If you were to talk to their exes prior to the person that they're in a relationship with now, you may find, one or two persons that say, this guy was toxic to me when I was in a relationship with him, or she was toxic to me when I was in a relationship with her. And sometimes the toxicity comes because we weren't made for each other. We weren't meant to be in a relationship, So a lot of times we may unknowingly find ourselves in a toxic situation, in a toxic relationship with somebody, because that person was not meant to be in our life long term. It may be that that person was only meant to be in our life for a season, and we're holding on to something or to someone when their time has expired out of our life. So because we're holding on to something or someone whose expiration date may have already passed from the season of our life, it slowly becomes toxic. But we have to take accountability for our actions. We have to acknowledge the part of us that may have been toxic to another person in a previous relationship. And with growth comes maturity. It could be that you were toxic to somebody in a season where you were immature, in a season where you were still trying to figure out who you were. You were still trying to figure out life. So you didn't understand yourself, and you didn't understand how love works. So in your season of growth, in your season of maturity, we should be able to look back and say, you know what? I was a horrible person to that person when I was in a relationship with them. We should be able to say, yeah, I was. You should be able to say, I have grown from what I used to be. Yeah, I may have been toxic. I may have been a toxic person in the past, because hurt people hurt people. You may have been toxic to a person in your relationship because of traumas in your life, unresolved, unhealed traumas in your life can cause you to be a toxic person. You don't choose to be a toxic person. Sometimes it just happens. But again, I say, as you grow and as you mature and you become more aware of yourself, you become more aware of your actions. When you have begun to heal, you should be able to take accountability for your past actions and say, I was toxic. I used to be toxic. But thank God I'm no longer as toxic as I was, or I'm no longer a toxic person. Because now you know how to resolve issues. You know how to take into consideration when your partner comes to you and speak to you and tells you what you are doing is hurting me. And rather than brush it off and to downplay it, you acknowledge it and you take the necessary actions and steps that you need to in order to fix it. Life is a ongoing learning experience. Every day is a learning experience. Every day we grow. The biggest room in any house, anywhere in the world, is the room for improvement. And you should be able to recognize and see the growth and the improvement within yourself as a person. And it all starts with acknowledgement, and it all starts with accountability for the things that we may have done in our past in order for us to be able to move forward and to move forward in a more positive light. So again, this is just something for us to think about when we are giving out advice. And it starts with me. I will be the first person, to admit to my faults. Okay? And I'm always the first person to admit to my faults. Granted, sometimes when people are pointing it out to me, I'm going to be like, no, that's not true. That's how you see it. Of course, sometimes I'm going to be on the defensive because I may not agree. But if it's being said, then it gives me something to think about. It gives me something to do a self-reflection on. Because everybody gets a different experience of you. And sometimes it is based on that person's actions. Granted, it is based on that person's actions. But if it is someone that genuinely cares about you, or you genuinely care about that person, and they come to you and express some feelings, some negative feelings that concerns them in a negative way, that affected them or impacted them in a negative way, you may not agree with it right there and then in that moment. You may be in the defensive right there and then in that moment. But it does take a moment of reflection on your part to analyze the situation and to see what they're saying is true. Because sometimes you don't always have to agree with everything that a person says. You don't have to. But sometimes our actions, no matter how well intent it may be received and perceived in a different way on the person that is on the receiving end. So when the person that is on the receiving end is telling you something, whether you agree or not or disagree, it would mean the world to that person if you acknowledge what they're saying and take some type of consideration into what they have to say. Because something that you may have said or done whether knowingly or unknowingly, may have caused them pain, may have hurt them, may have triggered them in some type of way, you know? So it's always good to do self-reflection. It's always good to take accountability, because there's no perfect humans on this earth. So if anybody was to say, I have never been toxic to anybody, that is a lie before God. And you are in denial, and you lack accountability for yourself, and you lack accountability for your actions. So I just wanted to share that with people, with everyone, because sometimes these videos are so interesting to me, especially when I know they say, do not judge a book by its cover, but let's face it, we're human. We are a judgmental people, and sometimes you can look at the person that's in the video, or the person that is giving the messenger that's giving the message, and the saying right message, wrong messenger. You can look at the person and you can see the toxicity just dripping off of them. You can look at the person and be like, damn, you are a toxic person giving relationship about toxicity. You can see it on a person. But again, don't judge a book by its cover. Sometimes we can make that assumption, and we all know what happens when you assume, right? What happens? Come on, it. Say it with me. You make an ass out of you and me. Okay. So on that note, I'm going to end it here. I hope you guys have a great, awesome, fantabulous day, an awesome week, and the remaining of the month of February. And I pray that every day after today for the rest of the year brings nothing but joy and success and positive growth to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for listening. I love you guys. Bye.